We're coming to our last talk of this section. How many folks here, I think Jared is gone, so I can again make you raise your hands. How many folks here have taken courses online? Oh, quite a few folks. And folks taken courses on Udacity? Oh, quite a few, okay. We can maybe do some user testing. Well, okay, this is a course that you won't even find on Udacity. We're really excited to have Jasmine Friedl. She's previously built and led design teams at Chan Zuckerberg Initiative and Facebook, and is currently the director of design at Udacity. Let's have a big round of applause for Jasmine.
Thank you, Jasmine. Thank you. Ooh, it is bright up here. So I hear I am the only thing standing between you and a coffee break. I'm not going to ask you to do the wave because I really think that was like the best wave in like all conferences ever. But it's only 30 minutes, and I think we can do this. So I'd like to start off by asking you a question. What is the most important skill that you think you can hire for when you're bringing a designer onto your team? So as you're thinking through this, many of you may be thinking about some core skills like visual design or prototyping or sketching. Slides are hard. We're good. And you wouldn't be wrong. There's definitely core skills that are basic table stakes for any role. And since I'm asking you generally here, we're not talking about specifically like visual design or game design or marketing design. Any core skill could be a reasonable answer when we're looking for someone to not only just perform, but really excel in a role. So some of you might have been thinking a little bit differently and thinking about maybe soft skills like communication or teamwork or leadership. We got this. Yeah, maybe not. Hold on. Please hold. There we go. Okay, soft skills. And we know what soft skills are. They're much broader and they span beyond design roles into many other jobs or roles. And they're definitely a complementary grouping when we're looking at core skills and soft skills. And I think we could probably all agree that when we're looking to bring on really great candidates, we'd probably need a few in each bucket to hire the right person. And as far as a set of skills that's right for your company or for your team, that's something that I can't really decide for you because that's dependent on your company or your team and your respective mission and vision and values. So here is what I can offer you. There's one skill that's probably more important than we think. So what I'd like to propose today is that self-awareness is the most important design skill, not because it fundamentally is a design skill, but because of what it does to affect these other skills. So today what I'd like to dive into is how self-awareness affects other skills and then how we can identify that in hiring and then within our teams. In order to do that, we need to know what self-awareness is. So pretty simply, it's that old Socrates saying, it's know yourself, right? It's the ability to see who we are clearly. We need to know our strengths and our weaknesses, and through those, that's how we understand how we fit into the world. So how do we evaluate self-awareness? Because that's what we need to do to be able to apply this to our skills and our teams. Well, I think we need to dive a little bit deeper into what self-awareness really means. So it's actually, know thyself isn't actually from Socrates. It's from someone else. We don't know who. It was basically an inscription at the Temple of Apollo in Delphi, and there's lots of inscriptions. This was just one of them. The reason that people associate this with Socrates is because he built on top of this, and what he built on top of this was linked to Plato's theory of reminiscence. And in that, he believes that everybody has knowledge. It's just about that ability to recollect that knowledge, and that's where we get wisdom. So where we most commonly know that is from the Socratic method. That's one's own conversation with her own soul. So in theory then, if we're looking at self-awareness, then that sort of self-reflection and internal questioning should lend an excellent path to self-awareness, right? Because we're talking about me, knowing about me. So I think we need to go a little bit deeper, so we'll put Socrates in the back of our heads and go a little bit further. So this is Tashi Urich. She's an organizational psychologist and researcher who's done a lot of work in the business world around self-awareness and how it's linked to professional development. She's an accomplished author, has a book, and she has a TEDx talk that honestly really blew me away. And I thought for a second, I was like, what if I just threw that up on the screen, let it roll for 20 minutes and call it a day? But what Tasha proposes is that people who are self-aware not only believe that they are through their own self-assessment, but this is the important part, people who know them well assess them in the same way. So what that means is if I think that I'm self-aware, I need someone else. I need my boss, maybe a colleague or a friend, my husband. I need someone to corroborate with me. There we go. So Tashi and her team ran a study, and what they found out from the people they surveyed is that when they asked, are you self-aware, 95% of the people that they surveyed thought they were. 95%, pretty high number. And the reality was only 10 to 15% actually were. So I'll let you do the math on that, and math is hard, so I'll do it for you in just a second. Think about the implications of that. It means that if the first question I were to have asked us in this room was, are you self-aware, about 80 to 85% of us would have been wrong. So I would highly recommend digging into her talk, but I'll summarize this for you. The reason that we assess ourselves incorrectly is that we rely on introspection to assess ourselves. And introspection, the way we introspect, it's faulty. So the problem with introspection is that we're asking why to understand ourselves and the world around us. And when we ask why, it's really easy to invent those answers that feel true, but are often very wrong. Things get hidden from our view and from our consciousness. And we can't self-assess accurately without adding our own worldview, our own bias, and I hate to say it because so many people think this is fact, but like our own truth. Those things are not facts. People who are self-aware ask what instead of why. And I'm going to give a really practical example here. So let's say I got into a fight with my husband, and this is obviously hypothetical because we never fight. But I'm taking some time and I'm a little bit angry and I'm like, hey, what went wrong? I need to reflect on this. So I have two options here. I can take the why route or I can take the what route. So if I take the why route, I'm going to ask things like this. Why did I respond in that way? Why is he being like this? Why do these things keep happening over and over? Or I can take route number two, the what route. Then I'm going to ask things like, what caused the argument? What did I do to escalate it? What could we have done differently? And you can see the difference between these two. With all those whys, I can frankly make stuff up. So for example, why is he being like this? Okay, well, maybe because he's mad at me because I loaded the dishwasher wrong and he's just taking it out on me. Maybe he's just inflexible, or maybe he doesn't love me anymore. So what I'm doing here is I'm fabricating, right? So I'm making up things that I'm not confident in, but they seem like these sort of reasonable to me answers that could be an answer to that why question. And honestly, it makes me feel a lot better to have an answer than to not have any. So in the whats, I can objectively and practically evaluate and use facts. So for this scenario, what actually happened? Well, I took over the nightly cooking and I told him he was doing it wrong. Okay. What did I do to escalate it? Then I added that he never does anything around the house. Okay. What could we do differently next time? So you can see those differences between what and why introspection. The whats are moving us forward, the whys are moving us backwards. And note that I'm not saying that we should never ask why. Why is a great way to dig in and understand behaviors and thoughts and perceptions. User research is a great example of this. What I am suggesting is that we take a look when we're looking to assess ourselves and the people around us and the things around us, and when we have the whys, ask if they could be whats and see if we can transform them. Today, I'm going to call this what over why. So now we've got two key pieces to self-awareness. We've got people who assess themselves, end up assessing them in the same way as others who know them, and we've got what over why. So using these two things, we'll talk about how self-awareness affects design skills and then how we evaluate that. So there's many skills that self-awareness is going to heighten, and I don't think self-awareness being a great skill is probably a surprise to anybody. But just for the purposes of this talk, I'm going to focus on three that after people have that foundation of self-awareness or are using their tools, these three skills should immediately build, and that is curiosity, authenticity, and flexibility. So to get at these skills, we're going to use the tools of self-awareness, pairing dual assessment with what over why. Okay, so if we agree that self-awareness requires that dual assessment, think of what that process had to look like. We had to be curious if we were self-aware in the first place. We had to ask someone to assess us. We had to take that assessment and we had to synthesize and come to understand it. And then we had to be curious enough to compare their assessment against ours. So there's a lot of curiosity that's sort of innate in self-awareness. Now, why is curiosity important in design? When we learn new ways of doing things or seek to learn new things, we're better problem solvers. We're better at laying out the problems before offering solutions. We talk to people instead of answering questions ourselves. We're essentially using evidence over conjecture. So I want to tell you a quick story about my friend and former colleague, Evan. So Evan's a UX designer, and he's one of the most curious people I know. He's always digging in to learn more and compare perspectives, and he seeks knowledge and understanding that help him inform his design decision-making through that inquiry. So to do this, he's asking things like, what happened, or what could I be doing differently, instead of why did this happen, or why isn't this working? He's bringing others in to compare perspectives rather than going it alone. So because he's using that dual assessment and what over why, and he's combining that with his curiosity, he's not only an excellent researcher, he's also a great product strategist, and he's a generative designer. And these are all things that we want our designers to have. So then, what about authenticity? Authentic people are confident. They know themselves. They are who they are, both to themselves and to others. That stems from self-awareness. That's that dual assessment. So why is authenticity important in design? So when a designer is able to really be themselves and show themselves truthfully and honestly to their teammates and leaders, it leads to great culture where people feel safe to be themselves and to project their work and really put their work out there for feedback. So going back to Evan is great. He's self-aware, he's curious. When I first met him, he was somebody who really used to keep to himself. He's very introverted, leads a very private life. I'm sure many of us are the same way. Now, I know him to be a very warm, caring, and kind person, and he's also a superb designer. The problem was when he joined the team, other designers didn't see him that way. What they saw was this standoffish and egotistical teammate. I mean, they saw those questions instead of that curiosity, instead of what it was, curiosity, but more as sort of accusatory. So Evan, could feel this. He knew that something wasn't right, and he made a decisive move to change this. And he started by using his curiosity. So he solicited feedback from his managers and his peers, and he used what over why to do this, and asked things like, what are your impressions of me, and what could I be doing differently? And he learned from this, obviously. He learned that his teammates needed to dive deeper and know more about his strategic thinking than just the directions that he gave. He also learned that he had a tendency to cut people off, which he had no idea about. So he had to leverage those tools that lend to self-awareness, which is that dual assessment and the what over why, and combine it with his curiosity to find out how to be more authentic. So before I get to that, I think I'm missing the results part. So the really important piece of that was that what that did was him being authentic, him taking how he saw himself and making modifications based on how others saw him. People began to see him for who he really was because it's how he began to see himself. And what that does is it lends to a psychologically safe team environment. And Josh just spoke about a couple things that make a psychologically safe environment. It's really important that we have that because that also breeds authenticity, but it really stems from a place of self-awareness. And last is flexibility. So if we're like Evan, we've asked for feedback, that curiosity, and now we're keenly aware of how others see us because it's now how we see ourselves. That's the authenticity. And much like Evan, we had to make those behavior changes based on the understanding that we found from those questions, and that's that flexibility. So why is flexibility important in design? Well, if you look at like any design process or critique, that points to flexibility. Flexible designers are always adapting based on new information or perspectives or feedback. They also take feedback well, and this is really important for a lot of reasons. Think about design critique or stakeholder feedback or user interviews. They also are always iterative and are always looking for improvements. I'll give you an example of somebody else. Julie is a product designer on my team now. She's self-aware, she's curious, she's authentic, and that allows her to be flexible. And she's somebody who asks for feedback. She incorporates it into her design work. Her last launch, I think, went through something like 12 painstaking, and I'm not joking, they were painstaking, but 12 iterations and pivots based on the feedback that she got. But she was soliciting that. She's asking for that with her curiosity, asking questions like, what could be improved upon again, rather than like, why isn't this working? And she's also brought in multiple designers. It's not only being collaborative, but also using that dual assessment to help evaluate and make sure we're moving things forward together. So again, because of those what over why habits, the dual assessment combined with that curiosity, authenticity, and flexibility, she's not only a favorite of teammates, but also cross-functional leads and stakeholders. And she does so by effectively negotiating, by seeking to understand the needs and values of all those parties and flexing those deliverables to maximize results for everyone. So those are some examples of self-aware people. Those are the kind of people we want on our teams, right? So as we're hiring folks and mentoring and developing them, how are we gauging self-awareness? So it would be awesome if every person that we hired just was self-aware and we started off and everything's great. So how might we evaluate self-awareness in the hiring process? So when you're evaluating self-awareness, it's not just about saying, like checkbox, are you self-aware, check Y or no. This is really about looking at the other facets and skills surrounding self-awareness and comparing them against each other, and that's where we extract self-awareness from. So I'll give you another example. Let's say I'm hiring for a junior product designer. So I know that I want end-to-end product skill or end-to-end design skills. I'm considering this for a product designer, and my team has established 6 skills that are really important. One of them is obviously self-awareness. So over the course of the interview, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be collecting evidence of these skills so that we can take time at the end to evaluate. And I also know that this is going to be a lot of work, and I want to make this as easy as possible, both on my team and the candidates, because we care about candidate experience, and we don't want the process to be too long or draining or redundant for them or for anyone else. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put together an agenda. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to set this up so that I might have like a set of employees who are doing a portfolio review, and they're going to be evaluating some of the core skills along with the soft skills, including self-awareness. And I might have another conduct something like a conversational background interview where we're evaluating more of the soft skills we value, including self-awareness. So in that interview, I'm going to send each interviewer in with both a guide and a script and a rubric that they've familiarized themselves with. I think the rubric is really important because that will give them a lot of information to help them gauge. And so that's going to have what our skills are, and the example here is visual design, what that skill actually means, the skill description, and then a simple scale assessment that they can evaluate this by. So after each session, each interview is going to step back and write some targeted feedback against that rubric, very simply. With the examples they have, what did they just see and hear? We're also going to want to zero in on how the candidates answer the questions that we're asking. So do they do so with evidence referring to those whats, or are they hypothesizing frequently where they could have found evidence instead using their whys? So we're looking to see if they're using what over why whenever possible. So then when we as the interviewers come together, we're going to lay down all of our observations and look for themes and patterns. So for any of you who conduct user research, this is like really straightforward. It's like first we observe and then we synthesize. And that synthesis is super important in interviewing because we're going to find those patterns that point to a lack of or a strength in self-awareness. And we'll go through some examples here. So we might have a candidate who says their strongest skill is visual design. I'm great at visual design, I'm so good at it. But it's actually probably their weakest skill based on what we saw. So is this person self-aware? If we're talking about dual assessment, these things don't match up. So probably not so much. So another example, someone says, I prefer a drama-free environment. So based on our skills, that might point to something like collaboration or proactivity. And they were actually showing us examples of proactively leading a team to resolve conflict. So is this person self-aware? Could probably say yes. And then we have somebody that says they have a flexible process that they've personally developed over time. And remember, we're thinking about junior designers. But every case study that we see follows this student-like template, and they're clearly missing some steps. Self-awareness? Survey says. Here we go. I just lost my notes. There we go. I was like, this is going to be fun. So a solid interviewing process takes time, but it's a really effective and accurate way to evaluate self-awareness among the other skills, obviously. We care about more skills than just self-awareness. But the thing that I think is really important is that the sort of rigor that we add to this is really a necessary way to implement fair and inclusive and equitable hiring practices. And there's something to note when I was giving the definition of how to look at self-awareness. When we're talking about self-awareness and hiring, our interviewers are generally not people who know the candidate well. They shouldn't be. If they were, that would introduce some bias and conflict in hiring. But what we're still doing is we're still introducing this concept of dual assessment, and we're pairing that with our idea of what over why. So that's in the hiring process. If we do that right and we start from scratch, we can hire a completely self-aware team, and that's amazing. We're golden. But sometimes, as design leaders, we're going to inherit teams. And sometimes when we inherit teams, there are some people on those teams who might not be so self-aware. So how might we evaluate self-awareness within the members of our teams? So I care deeply about each member of my team. I think to be a great leader and a great manager, you really have to. We have great teammates, make great teams do great work makes companies thrive. So smallest atom or lever that I'm going to work with right now is the individual. So let's say, hypothetically, I've taken over a new team and I'm starting to notice some issues. I'm noticing that output is of low quality, morale maybe seems a little bit low, and I'm starting to notice some bickering between teammates. Telling you, slides are real hard. So what I want to do is I want to go in and learn about the strengths and weaknesses of each of my teammates. And I'm trying to understand here what each person's areas of opportunities are and maybe their strengths are to maybe go in and solve this problem. And I'm probably suspecting that it has something to do with self-awareness. So I want to get essentially the same assessment that I did when we were doing the hiring piece, but this is different. This is a team that's already been there. We might have some sort of old school employees that maybe are a little reluctant to change. We might just have some folks who are just afraid of a new leader coming. And so because the tone is different, I'm going to approach it a little bit differently. So what I'm going to do is, for this situation, this is just one example of many that you can do, is I'm going to set up a bunch of one-on-ones with each teammate. So in the first one-on-one, well, before we set up those one-on-ones, here's what I'm going to be doing in those one-on-ones. What I'm going to be doing is I'm going to start to softly assess the skills that each teammate has, and I'm going to look at that through basically what they tell me and then what I'm observing. And then I'm also looking for those what over whys. Okay, in the first one, I'm going to get to know them. I'm going to really ask about what their story is, how they got into design, how they got here. This is the place where I'm going to learn the fun things like organically understanding and learning about their family stories and who their children are and what their dogs' names are. And I don't have many cat people on my team, so it's always all about dogs. But I'm going to learn not about their work, but I'm going to learn about them. And all these things are important because to do this, I need to build trust to get to the other things that I'm going to uncover. And I'm going to ask what over why myself so that I'm making sure that I'm pulling in that objective information. The second one-on-one, I'm going to talk about career path. I'm going to ask them what their strengths are and what are their areas of opportunity. I'm going to ask them where they want to be in 5 years and ask them if they know what they need to do to get there. And then I'm going to ask them what they need for me to develop. Again, lots of whats. And in that last one-on-one, I'm going to dive deep into their product work. I'm going to ask them to show me something they're working on, and then I'm going to ask them to evaluate their own work in skills like, for me, it's product thinking, interaction design, and visual design, because those are part of the core skills that we evaluate. And I'm going to ask them then to evaluate those work against their skills. Now, simultaneously, I'm going to be looking at the team as a whole and evaluating the team as a whole. So I might do something like host a team reflection where we spend some quiet time jotting down things that aren't going so well and things that need to be improved upon. And it doesn't matter whether we share these out in that conversation or anonymously, but I'm still going to collect and synthesize those themes. And as I'm synthesizing and laying down those informations that I have, I'm going to, again, discover areas of opportunity or areas of strength around self-awareness. For example, one of my product designers might think they're ready for a promotion based on their skills, and they're agonizing over why this isn't happening yet. And this happens so frequently. But when I look at their core skills, they're actually quite a bit below where those of their peers are. So if we're talking about self-awareness, not so much. Now, I might have a systems designer who thinks they're a really strong leader, and they've been sharing with me their whatever whys, their collaborative strategies, including things like soliciting frameworks, testing frameworks, getting feedback, and using mentoring and training sessions. This person, self-aware. And then I've got another designer that says, I am the most collaborative person I know. I work with everybody really well. But other teammates have mentioned that this person is specific, rarely shares progress, and it's an overall theme in some of our reflection that some teammates aren't working very well together. Self-awareness on this one? No one fast, maybe not so much. So knowing the skill shape of our team and the shape of each member, using these other skills to extract self-awareness really helps us know where to push on for improvements. Then we can use the following tools as strategies for development. So we've got things like, obviously, performance reviews and standing one-on-ones that are excellent opportunities to get to know somebody and ask more whats. But they're also opportunities to give feedback. We can collect peer feedback and give that to people as dual assessment to give really clear themes. We can give resources like articles, books, or people to talk to that give individuals avenues to pursue for learning and improvement. We can set up challenges for people to show progress, build partnerships for people to learn from each other. It's way easier to hire than it is to fire, and that's why you need to take the time to really pay attention to self-awareness. So if the people we bring on and develop are or can become self-aware, they're going to respond to these nudges for improvement a lot better and develop more because they're likely to be curious, authentic, and flexible. So I've been speaking mostly to design leaders because it's your job to not only have impactful teams, but also to have happy teammates. If we zoom out a little bit, and I think someone else alluded to this earlier, and this is obvious, but a design leader doesn't have to be a manager. So not everybody's going to have teams, and that's okay. But it's not up to the people that we report to move us along on our self-awareness journey. And everyone here, everyone in this room has a self-awareness journey, whether you consider yourself a manager or a leader or not. So how do we get started? We need to have those people who know us well, who are able to give us feedback. We need to know objectively who we are and understand what we must do to better ourselves. And we must practice those what over whys ourselves. So self-awareness isn't something that most people just have. Even that 10% of people that we talked about, they have to work for it. We need to have a growth mindset and know that this is something to work on and know this is something that we can and will get better at. And we can get started with the following simple steps. Rally your team around an agreed upon set of skills. Find you and your teammates assessment partners. And start to take notes of your whats and your whys and find those whys that can be transformed. The rest, with intentionality and focus, will follow. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jasmine. Thank you. Okay, that was an amazing talk. We have 5 minutes for 2 or 3 questions. Any questions from the back? It's been pretty quiet. Okay, that's kind of back. Yeah. Yeah, you're right.
Okay, cool. Hey, how's it going?
Hey.
You mentioned building agreement around sets of skills, and I'm gonna take that back actually to the hiring rubric that you gave us an example of. Do you have any advice or tips for building sort of alignment across the team on sort of that set of skills both within the team as well as when you're hiring?
Yeah, so I think they're essentially the same thing because you want to bring on people who have the same skills that you want to develop them in. And I actually just went through this when I joined my recent team. And the way that we went about it is we had all hands on deck. I think it's really the easiest way to get people bought in when they're part of the process. And so we did something where we did a sticky exercise and we did core skills and we did soft skills. And so everybody spent, maybe 10 minutes brainstorming and just writing on stickies all the things that they valued. And some of them were coming from places where, I'm amazing at this. Like, I want everybody else to, catch up where I'm at. And some of them were coming from a place of, we actually don't have this on our team. This is sort of a deficit. And then we did a bucketing exercise where we brought them together, and we did the same thing for soft skills too. And so what we just had for constraints was sort of a number of what we needed. We wanted 3 and 3. And we started to bucket. And there's a lot of discussion around like, does service design fall into interaction design, or is that product design, and where does research fall into this? And but it was really just sort of the synthesis exercise, and once we came to a close agreement, I made some executive decisions on what those should be, and then I wrote the descriptions myself and got some feedback on that. But I think it's really important to do that as a collaborative exercise, so that when you are putting somebody and saying, hey, you're gonna go interview this new candidate, and I need you to look for X, Y, and Z, they have to value that. If they don't value that, they're gonna craft the story on their own. So getting that buy-in and getting that alignment up front is really important.
At the back. Yep.
How do you identify and or prevent peer bias in a self-awareness evaluation?
How do you
Identify or prevent? So if you
identify or prevent bias in a self-awareness? Are you talking about like bias from, like I'm saying I'm self-aware and I'm biased, or Preet is evaluating me and he's biased because I didn't get my slides right? Yeah, I think that's important, because like there's, especially on teams when there's interpersonal dynamics and stuff, there's gonna be stuff that comes up. I think that's why like using that what is really important, because it comes less from a place of fabrication and making stuff up. But also doing that with multiple people usually helps. So, if Preet's my manager and he's like, she's just done, she's not going places, like I might need to bring in some other sources that are able to evaluate me and see if all of those match up. So maybe it's more than dual assessment, maybe it's more than multi-assessment. And I think there's something to be said for probably figuring out like, if there are dynamics between us that weren't so great, maybe those whats will uncover that, and we can actually use that as a tool to get to the bottom of that and come back to that evaluation at another time. I don't know, I think I'd also like to think on that a little bit more.
Last question. Anyone at the back? Coming front? Yeah, Steph.
So I loved everything that you said, and I think it's such a great approach, especially for someone to grow. One of the things that you mentioned, especially when your designers are asking for promotions and stuff, do you find that this approach helps, especially in tech where it's extremely competitive and stereotypically millennials just want to get to the next stage versus, earning that growth? Do you find that your attrition rates have lowered at least?
I don't think that I have enough like data to make that a thing, but as you're saying that, I'm like, I can think of one person in particular that really it didn't work for. So I think, in theory, this works really, really well, but there are gonna be people who just aren't self-aware. And there are gonna be people who just translate the evidence completely differently. And so for me on my team, I think I have like 18 direct reports right now. Like I can honestly say all of them are on a path to self-awareness and we're implementing this. So like that's generally successful, but there are obviously gonna be circumstances that aren't gonna like make your numbers completely tick, because that's on the individual. And then there comes the conversation of like, if you value this, if you value self-awareness more so or equal to what you do in your craft or your prototyping or something like that, like how are you actually handling that and working on that as an opportunity for development? Is that something we're sort of like just moving around and letting that, be a toxic thing that's bringing everybody else down and then your attrition isn't working at all? Or is that something where we're sort of like nipping that in the bud and, maybe going so far as to like move that teammate to somewhere else where they can be more successful? So I think in the limited sample size I have, sure, but I don't have like thousands of people to give you like a data forward number.
Awesome. Let's have a big round of applause for Jasmine.
Cool. Thank you so much.